Hi there. Today I want to talk about myths, fallacies, and assumptions. For the past few weeks, we've been working on fractions problem solving, and part of that problem solving involves making assumptions. Assumptions about things we know, and maybe some assumptions about things we don't know. Specifically today, I want to talk about social or cultural construction of ideas and how that leads to assumptions. I also want to talk about the social construction of notions and ideas and how that may lead to naturalistic fallacies. In class, I've used the term social construction, and some of you have made quizzical faces, and today I want to explain what I mean by the term social construction. Basically, social construction or cultural construction, the two terms are used interchangeably, is an idea, belief, or concept that people have created, and then they organize their actions and thoughts around those concepts and ideas. These things could not have existed without the influence of humans or culture or society, and each of them could easily have been constructed differently by different people or a different culture in a different time and space. Let me give you some examples. An excellent example of cultural construction is the value of money. In actuality, paper money has very little intrinsic value. Maybe the value of the paper and potentially the metal strips inside the paper and the printing. These things combined are much less than the extrinsic value that we culturally construct on a piece of paper. In a similar vein, think about coins. Coins have an economical face value of a penny or 25 cents or a dollar, but actual value of the metal in the coin could be quite different. We collectively construct and place value on this item that in reality has quite a different value. If you lived in a different culture, say you lived in a small island in Melanesia or in the Indian Ocean, you might use shells as a form of currency and buy and exchange goods and services using shells. The fact that we use paper and coins as opposed to shells is a cultural construction. Similarly, lines on a map are a cultural construction. Lines are drawn on maps as a result of treaties and wars and ownerships of land. But are there really lines on the land? I'll tell you a funny story. When I first started travelling, I left my home in Perth, Western Australia to go to South Australia. It was the first time I'd ever crossed a border between states, and I honestly and naively thought that I would see a line on the ground. I was very disappointed when I crossed the border and there was no line on the road, just a sign saying "Welcome to South Australia." These lines on the map are more than just lines on a map. As cultural constructions with shared meaning, they dictate our nationality. They dictate who can travel where and who can do what and who can bring things across borders and who's going to be charged what tariff. These imaginary, culturally constructed lines are very, very powerful. Just reflect on the ongoing debate about the US-Mexico border right now, illegal immigration and the wall. Just because some people were born on one side or another of a culturally constructed line, they have a different government and live completely different lives. Imagine if the history had drawn the line differently. Another excellent example is football. I included this cartoon in the syllabus. Imagine if the US and England were ever to get together for a world football tournament. Could you imagine what that would be like? The Americans would turn up in their gridiron uniforms and the Brits would turn up with a soccer ball. Each would have different concepts of the game, the rules, how to win and how to play. You would have the same problem if you headed down to Australia and tried to have a football tournament. All the rules are completely different, the game is much rougher, and I might add the costumes are much more appealing to the female spectators. Despite the fact each culture has the game of football, the differences are culturally constructed. Cultural construction permeates almost every element of our lives. If you're living in a westernized country, wearing a white dress to a wedding might be the norm for you, and you might assume that everyone did it this way. But in reality, in some countries, for example India, women wear red wedding dresses. This is their norm, and they assume that all other brides in the world will wear red dresses. In fact, women only wear white dresses if they are widows. When you see this image, do you think of breakfast? That's because your notions of breakfast are culturally constructed. But what if you saw this? Would you think breakfast? In some cultures, this is breakfast and this is what people expect breakfast to look like, not bacon and eggs and sausages. That's because we eat what we eat for breakfast, and for any other meal for that matter, is a social construction. Social construction seems natural or obvious to people who accept them, but they may or may not represent reality. They're an invention or an artifice of a given society or culture, and as such, they can become assumptions that you might assume that everyone believes. You might assume that everyone drives on the right-hand side of the road or the left-hand side of the road, depending on where you came from. Let's look at another example. When you look at this picture, do you instantly think blue is for boys and pink is for girls? That's not always been the case. Less than 100 years ago, a very famous infants department store instructed parents that it was generally acceptable that pink was for boys and blue was for girls. The reason they gave that pink was more decided and stronger and more suitable for a boy, while blue was more delicate and dainty and prettier for a girl. In a 1927 Life magazine, they published a table in their magazine illustrating several department stores' take on preferred colours for different genders. The majority felt pink was more preferential for boys, with blue being the choice for girls. It was not until the 1940s that pink became the colour for girls and blue for boys. My point is that cultural constructions change over time, and they are influenced by political and economic influences. Today, there is still a legacy of pink and blue, but many parents influenced by feminist thinking are choosing gender-neutral colours of yellow and green. Up until now, I have discussed fairly easy to understand examples of cultural construction: money, map lines, weddings, food, baby clothes. But what about culturally constructed ideas and notions that we hold near and dear? So near and dear that we defend them like they are the only way of doing something. Maybe because we think they are natural or right. Think about things like democracy, freedom, race, gender, diversity. What about things like love, and specifically mother's love? In the next section of this module, you'll be reading 2 articles that challenge the concept of mother's love and suggest that it could be a naturalistic fallacy. That is, what you perceive as natural might merely be a social construction.